Welcome everybody to this exciting teaching we can offer tonight. This is EJL, the European Academy of Jewish Liturgy, what was founded by Jackie Chernett almost 20 years ago, I guess, something like that. My name is Yalda. I'm the Director of Studies of this institution, this Academy Without Walls, and we are so thankful to have Cantor Dr. Andrew Bernard tonight here as a teacher. I put together, only for those who don't know him, a little bit of his amazing biography. He received a Bachelor of Music and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the Oberlin College Conservatory, and he earned both a master's and a doctorate in choral conducting from the University of Washington. He received the Master of Sacred Music degree and cantorial ordination from Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion, in 1998. Following ordination, Andrew completed a residency in clinical pastoral education at the Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. Beginning in 1999, Andrew served as a senior cantor at Temple Beth El in Charlotte, North Carolina for 18 years and as chaplain specialist at the Levine Children's Hospital for 11 years, where he focused on pediatric critical care and oncology. Yeah. And the most important work for us is his book. You see it here, The Sound of Sacred Music, or The Sound of Sacred Time, a book with what many of us were studying and that we give to our students to learn from this amazing book. And Andrew, we are so pleased to have you tonight here, and we are very, very welcoming to you and to your talk you will give us tonight. We decided that Andrew will first go through his what he has to teach us. And if you have some questions, please take some notes, and we will take the questions after the teaching. There will be time for question and answer. So, Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm very excited to be here. Good morning from Seattle, Washington. I wish it was quite that beautiful today, but it's not too bad a day. I am going to first I want to make sure that all of you can see here. You should all be seeing that slide. Is that correct?
Yes.
With a little version of me stuck down in the corner. So what I want to do today is give you an overview of how the Nusach brings our liturgy to life. And I want to show you as many of the ways as possible how Nusach functions and hopefully it will spur some creative thinking. The goal is not for you to come away learning how to chant a particular prayer or execute a piece of liturgy, but rather my goal is that you get some of the thought process behind it. When I was a piano major at the Oberlin Conservatory, one summer I had a chance to take some lessons with the legendary piano teacher, Jack Radunsky. And what he told me was, if I can teach you how to practice, you can figure out the rest. And so similarly today, if I can help you ask the good questions, you will be able to figure this out on your own. I am going to move fairly quickly, but in the next couple of days, I will generate an annotated version of this presentation that you will be able to have if there's anything you want to spend more time working with. So, let's see. There we go. So today I want to talk about the purpose of the chant, specifically the way the music serves the text. We're going to look at how the Nusach functions in the liturgy. We're going to look at how, along with the other categories of Jewish music, it will tell us where we are. It will tell us where we are going. It will support the liturgical cycle. It will connect ideas through musical midrash and illuminate the text through text painting. And then if we have enough time, I will just show you a couple of really quick applications of some of this material. So the categories of Jewish music, of course, Nusach HaT'fillah, which is the organizing principle of the prayer. Biblical trope, whatever region you are from and you use, there are 6 different systems of trope. Sinai tunes, there are somewhere, they say 7 to 10 melodies. It's not set in stone, for high holidays and 3 festivals from they originate in the late Middle Ages in Europe, and they are applied to the Ashkenazic tradition. And then, of course, there's the hymns and songs that we use, all of the hymns that we use, for instance, to sing Mi Chamocha on the holidays. I'm gonna look at the difference between some of these elements. So biblical trope is a strict system that you should apply consistently. However you do it, whatever principles you use should be absolutely consistent. There are very, very, very few decisions you actually make when you're chanting using biblical trope. The trope define the syntax. They combine the words that need to be combined, they separate the words that need to be separated, and they add punctuation. Nusach are short phrases, sometimes it's just 2 notes, that organize the sentences, beginnings and endings and all the different things that happen in the middle. And I'll show you one example of that later. They are the basis for improvisation. Unlike biblical trope, these are the opposite. They are a jumping off point for improvising, whether you're emphasizing a word or a phrase. Different cantors would do it differently, in part because of their voices. A lyric baritone or mezzo would chant differently than a coloratura, soprano, or tenor. It's an oral tradition that was, for a long time, passed down from one cantor to the next. Now we actually go to school for this. And different parts of the service use different prayer modes. Looking at Sinai tunes, as we said, Nusach is made up of these tiny musical fragments. Sinai tunes have within them discrete melodies, and these are used as building blocks for a prayer setting. If you've ever hunted around for a setting of Kol Nidre, which is the most famous Sinai tune, that you wanted to use, you'll notice that the melodies are the same, but the way they're applied in the text are not always exactly the same. I kind of look at it, it's like Legos. You know, you have these tunes and you put them together. The prayer modes are associated with usually a section of a particular service. Now, one prayer can be a unique subset of the mode, but in general, the prayer modes go with different sections of the service. The Sinai tunes originate with a particular prayer from the high holidays or the 3 festivals. Okay? And so Kol Nidre, the Great Aleinu, Aleinu leshapeach, and lots of Chatzi Kaddish settings for the holidays and the festivals. Now, a word about tonal music versus modal music. Tonal music is based on scales and harmonic patterns, on chord progressions. The synagogue modes are a collection, as we keep saying, of little musical figures from which we can derive scales. So if you take all those little phrases and you write down all the notes, you can make a scale out of it. But the scale is not the mode. Also, synagogue modes and church modes are not the same thing. Okay, just as an aside. And just to note that when we talk about modes, we do borrow some vocabulary from Western tonal music. All right? So, why Nusach? This is the slide that says, why do we care? Music evokes memories. And I'm not just talking about singing Ma'asur on Hanukkah, but that song that you sang at camp or at school with your friends. I grew up in the 60s, and if I hear a Simon and Garfunkel tune, it takes me right back to high school. It is said that you could blindfold a Jew, walk them into a synagogue, and they could tell you the day and the time of day based on what they are hearing. And I'm going to use it as an example, the Baruch Hu. And you're going to hear that each of these is very, very distinct. So, for the weekdays, and I'm slightly under the weather, so please excuse the chanting. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach, Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Quick, simple, to the point. It's a weekday. You have places to be, things to do. It tends to be a simple service. Shabbat morning, you have all the time in the world. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach, Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. And we're going to come back to a couple of these congregational responses later because they are important. High holiday evening. This Baruch Hu is the Mi-Sinai tune. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach. Now note the response. Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Extremely recognizable. High holiday morning, this is based on a Mi-Sinai tune. The Mi-Sinai tune is actually the Chatzi Kaddish that comes right before it. And it's essentially just copied into Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach. Again, Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. And festival evening, which is my favorite, which is why I skipped to it. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach, Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. All extremely different and all extremely recognizable. So, we're not going to get into the details of the modes, but I just want to go very generally over them, the important ones, and a couple of important characteristics. So these are the three main modes. You'll also hear about study mode and psalm mode and Ukrainian Dorian mode. Those are a slightly different issue. All right, Magen Avot is named for the prayer found in the Ein Sheva at the end of Shabbat Ma'ariv. It is minor sounding. It is not in the minor key. It is a minor sounding mode, and one of the important characteristics is that it usually has a phrase in the relative major. So, Magen Avot bidvaro mechaye metim b'ma'amaro. Di-da-da-da-dum is the relative major of di-da-da-da-dum. Okay, so you can see how that's put together. It tends to be a simpler mode. Ahava Rabbah. This is the Jewish sounding mode because it has that augmented second. But you will also hear it called Phrygish. Phrygish is the Yiddishization of Phrygian. So in the church modes, the basics of church modes, if you play all the white keys starting on D, it's Dorian, E is Phrygian, F is Lydian, etc., etc. In the Phrygian mode, because it starts on E. E to F is a half step. The first interval in Ahava Rabbah is a half step. So it is sometimes referred to as Fragish. And then we have Adonai Malach. Adonai Malach is Psalm 93, the eighth of the Kabbalat Shabbat Psalms. Sometimes it's referred to as the Jewish major, which you'll hear in a moment. But it has some odd notes in it, and we'll talk about that later. Adonai Malach Ehud Lavesh, Lavesh Adonai Osit Azar. That note, which doesn't belong in the major. Okay, and we'll see more of that in a moment. Now, I broke down just one prayer, just so you can get the idea of how there are phrases that are at the beginning and the middle and different thing, and the end and different things that happen. Okay, so I'm going to do the whole thing first, and then I'll break it down. Hamechadesh betuvo bechol yom tamid maseh v'reshit ka'amur le'oseh orim gedolim ki le'olam chaso. So the opening, 2 notes, ba-bam, just to get your attention. In most of the modes, and especially in this mode, there are a lot of musical sequences. Now, secondary opening. So I think of a secondary opening as you're in the middle of a paragraph and you have somewhere buried in the middle of the paragraph a sentence that's going to introduce a slightly new idea. Ka'amur. So that's a secondary opening. Tells you that you're starting to think about something else. I'm going to skip pre-concluding for just 1 sec. And then a concluding phrase, which brings you to a final sounding cadence. Ki le'olam chasto. Because the augmented second is emphasized. Now, pre-concluding phrase, logically, is the phrase that leads to the concluding phrase. You are very, 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 very familiar with these because it's something you do every week. Melech Hoseh u'Moshiach u'Magin Baruch atah Adonai Magin Avraham Bezrat Sarah. The strong pre-concluding phrases go very low because it forces you to go up. Now, sometimes this does not want to work. Okay. So I mentioned before that Adonai Malach sounds like major but is not. And just as my gain of vote sounds like minor but is not. And there is a difference. So sometimes I hear with the Giverot, I hear the bottom line. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai mechayeh kol atah rav lehoshia. That's a lovely tune in major. Tim bum bim bum bim ba da da dum. The top one, because of that note that I have marked, is definitely no longer in major. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai mechayeh metim atah rav lehoshia. And there would be more odd notes if the melody went even higher. And we're going to we'll take a little bit closer look at that as well. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is how the music serves the text. Okay? The Nusach is supposed to clarify the text. It is supposed to make the text clearer in your ear. So let me just a couple of words of caution. First, I'm going to use a lot of examples that you are extremely familiar with, a lot of the Shabbat Amidah examples. If I show you something and you go, oh, that's really good, please do not try and go back to your congregation and change something, because they will not like you anymore and you will frustrate them. But I'm doing this because I think it will be very clear to you why subtle changes actually make a difference. And a lot of this is based on when the Reform movement decided to add the matriarchs in addition to the patriarchs, we have more words or we have more phrases. So The first one is what I hear a lot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu. Now, v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, the God of our fathers and our mothers. I liken it to the phrase fresh fruits and vegetables. Fresh applies to fruits, fresh applies to vegetables. What we want to hear is fruits, vegetables. That's what we have. V'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu. Now, when the Nusach makes a leap or changes direction, it will emphasize a word. So if I do, as in the first example, V'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, and the God of our fathers, oh yeah, and our mothers, as opposed to the one below it, V'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, you clearly hear avotenu, imotenu. V'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu. So it does make a difference in how you hear it. This is another example from the Amidah. V'zocher chastei avot. That's the traditional, and you will remember the deeds of our fathers. Okay, so now we're going to add imahot. V'zocher chastei avot v'imahot. My objection, it's not terrible, it's not wrong, and with a lot of these, I have lots of pet peeves, and I will argue that I don't like certain things. However, if you do it that way, we're not setting up a Nadav and Abihu situation where the lightning's going to come down out of the ceiling and zap you dead on the bima, if you do it. But here's my objection. We are trying to honor the matriarchs. And here, they're tossed off as an afterthought. V'zocher chastei avot v'imahot. You remember the deeds of our fathers. Oh yeah, and those women over there. The bottom one reworks it so that each one gets equal weight. V'zocher chastei avot v'imahot. To me, that's just more respectful, which is what we are trying to accomplish in the first place. Now, here's where we get into trouble. Because now we're not adding a word. Now we have to add an entire phrase. So, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Now, we could just repeat the melody. Line 1, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. It's not horrible, but again, it doesn't give the matriarchs anything special. They're just verse 2, essentially, in this song. So the question is, how can you give them something which is compatible, that fits the patterns, but is something that stands on its own? So if the first line is an ascending pattern, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Line 2, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. I have a pattern going down. To me, it's like an arch. You have the patriarchs, you have the matriarchs, and you put them together and it makes a whole solid structure, but both halves of the structure are equally important. Now, when I do it, I use the third line. Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Only difference is in the ending. Puts a period at the end of that sentence. Okay, it's a stronger stop. Elohei Leah is more like a comma or a semicolon. Now, but I hear it the second way. I hear it the way line 2 is a lot, and I thought about it for a long time, and I thought, okay, how would I justify that? How would I say that would be my preferred way of looking at it? Well, after this comes Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Honorah, the God who is great and mighty and awesome, God on high. So what happens if I think of it as one very, very long list? the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Sarah, the God of Rebekah, the God of Rachel, the God of Leah, the God who is great, the God who is strong, the God who is awesome, God on high. If that is one list to me, if that's one thing, I would use the second line because I don't want to have a big stop. If I want to do the patriarchs and the matriarchs, and then I want to go on to these other attributes of God, I do the third line because that's a full stop. Okay? The differences are subtle, but they say something about the way you conceive of that prayer. Now, we have the same but slightly more difficult issue with the high holidays. So, this is the Kachko notation. Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Ve'Elohei Yaakov. So the Transcontinental publication, the Reform Movement publication, basically does verse 2. Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Ve'Elohei Leah. Okay, but I have two quibbles. One is a little one and one is a bigger one. The little one is, it's just a repetition. It's just verse 2. Can you do something with the matriarchs that fits in, but is at least slightly different? My big objection is that the way this is set, you have a huge stop after Yaakov. Ve'Elohei Yaakov, period at the end of the sentence. But then you have the same thing in the next line. Ve'Elohei Leah. All right, now they're not equal halves. Now they're two separate things. So how can we change the first one so that it's not a solid ending, but it points ahead, and make a slight difference so that the matriarchs and the patriarchs have slightly different melodies? So this is my solution. My solution is not Torah, okay? And neither is the Transcontinental publication. Just because it's written down, just because some publisher put it out in a book, doesn't mean it's Torah, all right? Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, that's moving somewhere. Elohei Sarah, slightly different. Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Ve'Elohei Leah. So we only have one ending this time. Okay? These are some of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm approaching these prayers. All right. Now, I said earlier that these the Nusach will tell us where we are and where we're going. So we're going to start with, where are we? And I'm going to start with endings. These are some traditional endings which are pretty unmistakable. So this is the third blessing in the Amidah. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Da-di-da-dum is pretty solid for Shabbat. High holidays, of course. Baruch atah Adonai hamelech hakadosh. Congregation. Amen. You are in the high holiday mornings. No question. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Amen. 3 festivals. That's exactly where you are. Okay? So those will definitely catch your ear. And remember, I said that music evokes memories. If we have these patterns and we use them on those places where they belong, we begin to, when we hear them, it puts us in a particular place in our minds. Okay? All right. Now, the bottom one, this was the response for the Shabbat Baruch Hu that I said we would come back to. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed da-di-da-da-da-dam is fairly ubiquitous in both the weekday and the Shabbat services. Okay? So, morning blessings. You'll see that the second example of an ending is Pokeach Ivrihim da di da 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 dum. We're still in that same mode. Now, I tend to do the top line. I'll tell you why in just a second. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Pokeach Ivrihim, or Pokeach Ivrihim, or Pokeach Ivrihim. The key is at the end of those. And here's why. Morning blessings are traditionally done responsively. Cantor chants, congregation chants, Cantor chants, back and forth. So you're only doing, whoever you are only doing half the blessings, but you can't do half the blessings. You have to do all the blessings. But our tradition says that as long as you say amen to somebody else, you get credit. Okay, so Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Pokeach Ivrihim. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Pokeach Ivrihim Malbish Arumim. Okay, and back and forth with the amens. So even though those are variations, they all have that characteristic at the end. Okay, which is important. Just my reasoning, you'll hear version Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Pokeach Ivrihim. Study mode. It's very repetitive, but it's similar. The only reason I do the one that I have there is I like the idea that musically, it's progressing because it's ascending. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Pokeach Ivrihim. I like the feeling of moving towards something, but it's not important. It's important to me, but probably not to very many other people. Torah blessings. This is another one of my pet peeves. So, Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah, Amen. Da di da 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 dum. That's what you hear weekdays and Shabbat. All right. A lot of times I hear Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah, Amen. Well, that sounds like high holidays, doesn't it? Hakadosh, Amen. Is it horrible? No. But why? I mean, that's, for me, the question is, why would you do that? Because that sounds like high holidays, and why wouldn't you do the one that sounds like Shabbat? Again, the formulas that go with particular days or particular services, if you repeat those, they become a thing in your head. And anytime you hear another prayer using that, it connects you with it. All right? Before we go on, I'm going to start the section on identifying phrases. So there are certain phrases that when we hear, we know exactly where we are. Just look at the top line here. Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Shabbat Amidah is in Adonai Malach mode. Okay? Where else, because there's a lot, Adonai Malach mode is used in lots of different services on lots of different days. Where else do you hear the tune? Da di da di da 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 dum, da di dum da di da dum. Where else does that particular tune appear? So it's a trick question. The answer is nowhere. That particular formulation is only in the Shabbat Amidah. So that melody is a subset of Adonai Malach mode. Okay? Now, we're going to hear some other melodies that only appear in certain services. So here we have It's kind of a strange melody, but the fact that it's a strange melody actually works to our advantage, which I will, if we have time at the end, I will show you how. So Shabbat Mari, the Shema Uvirchoteha, can be chanted in major or it can be chanted in minor. There are two traditions. This happens to be the tradition in major. Uma'avir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uvein laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimach aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'ma'ari v'aravim. And the next blessing would also incorporate that same melody. Interestingly enough, the melody doesn't change if you're in minor. I'm going to try and do this and not mess it up. Uma'avir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uvein laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'ma'ari v'aravim. So, one in major, one in minor, but the identifying phrase does not change. We have a similar situation in Shabbat Mincha. So this is chanted in Magen Avot mode. We have one phrase which appears throughout the Mincha service. Yitkada v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, ve'alem adiverach yirutei, ve'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yamechon, u'v'chayedecho beit Yisrael. That phrase, yidad, is the leitmotif. That is what tells you that you are in Shabbat Mincha. Okay, so you can see that certain phrases attach to very specific places, and that tells us where we are. Now, the question about where we are going. So this is a little bit of a broader category. In our liturgical cycle, we are always going somewhere. It never stops. Okay? We're gonna talk just in a second about the fact that even the huge holidays, even when you get to the end of the high holidays, you get to the end of Yom Kippur, we don't stop. Okay? And we often foreshadow what is to come, either ritually or musically. Okay, so here are some of the practices that you're familiar with. On Simchat Torah, we read the end of the Torah, we read the end of Deuteronomy, and immediately we read the beginning. Why? Because we're symbolizing that the study of Torah is also a never-ending cycle. The weekly Torah reading. We read Torah Monday, Thursday, Saturday. Monday we read the first section of the portion. Thursday, we read the first section of the portion again. Saturday, we read the entire portion, or the triennial cycle, a third of the portion, but we read the whole thing on Saturday morning. On Saturday afternoon, we read the first part of the next week's portion. Now, we're not there yet. So if I'm on Shabbat Bereshit, on the afternoon, on Saturday afternoon of Shabbat Bereshit, I'm going to read the beginning of Noach, even though I'm not there yet. Why? This is part of that tradition that says that we should always rush to do a mitzvah. We are excited about studying the next thing, right? Now, this may or may not be a custom in your congregation. At the conclusion of the high holidays, we get to the end of Ne'ilah, we get the final shofar blast, it is followed by Havdalah, but before we leave the synagogue to go to our break the fasts, there is one other thing that, at least in many congregations here, is done. And that is, we symbolically put the first nail into the sukkah. Sukkot is in 5 days. Before we leave at the end of high holidays, we already acknowledge it's about to be Sukkot. Okay? And it serves, within a service, it also serves a function. So, why do we do Vishamru on Friday night? I mean, yes, it's a Friday night text, the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, but why do we do that? Well, in a traditional congregation, the Amidah is done silently. So, by doing Vishamru, it is a reminder to the congregants that you should daven the Shabbat Amidah and not the weekday Amidah. Okay? It takes the place of the rabbi saying, please turn to page blah, 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 and silently daven the Shabbat Amidah. Okay? Also, musically, it happens. You have Vishamru, you have Chatzi Kaddish. So Chatzi Kaddish, Yitkara v'yitkara Shemei Rabbah, is in Magen Avot, because we're setting up what's going to happen at the end of the service. And when a congregation davens silently, you actually hear lots of mumbling. And the mumbling is sort of quiet chanting. The soundscape for that Shabbat Amidah that is silent is going to be Magen Avot. So if you did the first part of the service in major, Chatzi Kaddish tells you now we're going to switch to something else for the rest of the service. Musical foreshadowings are called anticipations. So this one is kind of clear. Benching Rosh Chodesh. Friday before Rosh Chodesh, we announced that the new month is coming. Okay, this is foreshadowing. It is traditional that included is a snippet of a melody that comes from the holiday that's in that month. So this is Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the month of Hanukkah, and so Israel Alter slips in a phrase from the Hanukkah candle blessing. So, Rosh Chodesh Kislev Yeh B'Yom HaChamishi Haba Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Letova. It's just a little fragment, just stuck in the middle. Asher Kiddishanu B'Mitzvotav. So we do it both ritually and musically here. Now, you can do these yourself. It depends upon what your congregation does every week. It depends upon how either creative or mischievous you're feeling. So, if your congregation does the Friday night, the Chatzi Kaddish on Friday night, it gives you an opportunity. So I had this conversation with a Cantor friend of mine about 2 weeks ago. When is it okay to use certain things in advance? So during the month of Elul, we usually slip in little bits of high holiday stuff to let them know that it's coming. But her question was, should you reserve for the actual holiday, or is it okay to take a hint in advance? Some of those things you really want to leave for the holiday. You don't want to sing the Micha Mocha for the holiday before the holiday, but you can still give them an indication of what's coming next. So for Hanukkah, we would do Ma'osur Yeshuati Micha Mocha Bailim Adonai, but I don't want to do that the week before Hanukkah, but I want to say, hey, Hanukkah's on its way. Yehi Shemei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam U'Melamaya Yitbarach Yitbarach Ve'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei k'dusha b'richu. So it's a little teeny snippet. You throw it in, it comes in, and it goes out. You throw it in, the congregation is going to go, what? They're going to look at you like you're crazy, but by the time they figure out, oh, I know what he's doing, you're back into the regular one. You can do the same thing. This is just another example, the same thing for Pesach. Yitbarach, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yipar v'tromam v'naseh, V'yitadar v'yitaleh, etc., etc. And by the way, I have all the Michamochas and all of these written out for all of the holidays. If you want them, you will send me an email and I will get them to you. Now, we use this foreshadowing to help us get, as we said, Chatzi Kaddish gets us from, if we do the beginning of the Mariv, Friday Mariv service in major, it gets us to Adonai Malach. So, in the middle of the service, we have Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta we chant in Torah trope. And then we have to get to whatever we're going to do next for Michamocha. So, it is traditional that the congregation finishes Ani Adonai Elohechem. The Cantor chants Adonai Elohechem Emet, the last two words of the Ve'ahavta, and Emet is the first word of the next section, both evening and morning. Okay? So, how you chant it is going to lead you into whatever Michamocha setting you are eventually going to get to. So, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem Emet, leads us nicely to Michamocha Bailim Adonai. Okay? Now, what if we're doing, we can also do Adonai Elohechem Emet, Michamocha Bailim Adonai. Okay? It's a transition. It's almost like a modulation, but it's a transition, and that's one of the ways we can use the Nusach. And of course, we need one more. Adonai Elohechem Emet, Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai, Mi Kamocha Netar Ba'Kodesh. By Dan Nichols. I don't know if you guys use that. It's fairly popular in a lot of our congregations here. There are not a lot of Mi Chamocha settings that are in major. But this will come in especially handy on some of your holidays. We just did Hanukkah, Mi Chamocha Bailim Adonai, and Passover. I'm sorry. That was Passover. Hanukkah. Mi Chamocha Bailim Adonai. So those are all in major. And if you do silly things like I do on Purim, Mi Chamocha Bailim Adonai, it's useful there. So, Mi Chamocha doesn't follow immediately after Adonai Elohechem Emet, and you may actually be in a slightly different key, but it takes you into the soundscape of what you are coming to next. All right, we have an issue here. So Adonai Malach, which is the basis for the Adonai Malach mode, the last psalm before the Shabbat Mariv service. If we do the Shabbat Mariv service in minor, then we have to get there somehow. Okay, so there's two different solutions to this. And on both of these excerpts, the things that I've circled, those little blue things, those are just some things about the mode that we've talked about. So it may ring a bell with you. So this one, we start Adonai Malach as we usually do. Adonai Malach Ehud Lavesh, Lavesh Adonai Ohuz Hitazar, Aftikon Tevel Baltimore, and it continues on and on and on. And then at the last verse, we make a modulation. Edotecha nemnu meod, Levitecha nava kodesh, Adonai leo Yamim. Baruch hu et Adonai hamevorach in minor. Okay? And notice, da-dee-da-da-da-dum. That is not an accent. The other way we can do it is, this is the 8th of the Psalms. The whole thing goes into Magen Avot or minor. In this case, Magen Avot. The entire psalm is done in that. Adonai malach lavesh, lavesh Adonai ositazar, aftikon tevel, baltimot. It's traditional in some places that Edotecha starts with the whole congregation. Edotecha nemnu meod, levetecha nava kodesh. Cantor finishes, Adonai leorech yamim, baruch hu et Adonai. Okay, and it goes on. Now, this leaves us, of course, with the very odd thing that we are not chanting Adonai Malach in Adonai Malach mode. It's one of the quirks of the liturgy. Sometimes you do not chant Adonai Malach in Adonai Malach mode. To me, it's akin to the weekday Amidah. Weekday Amidah, we call it the Shemona Esrei, the 18 benedictions. How many blessings are there in the weekday Amidah? 19. Why are there 19? Well, we think that at some point one of them got split out into 2. So we ended up with 19. But we always called it the 18 benedictions. So we still call it the 18 benedictions. It's one of those quirky things. I like to think of it as part of our charm. All right. Now, the good stuff. I want to talk about making connections. And we're going to make connections through ritual and liturgy. So, from Passover to Shavuot, we count the Omer every day. Okay, that connects those seasons together. Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah. The Shabbat after Tisha B'Av is Shabbat Nachamu, where we named after the Haftarah. The first of the readings from the latter portion of the book of Isaiah. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. And all 7 Shabbatot, we do another one of these Haftarot of consolation. And then after that, Rosh Hashanah. The penitential season. Now I'm talking the whole penitential season. So from the first day of Elul, the month of preparation from the high holidays, all the way to the 7th day of Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, encompasses the penitential season. Why does it go that far? Well, at the Ne'ilah service, we change from asking God to inscribe us in the book of life to seal us in the book of life. But our traditions teaches that the book is actually not sealed. Our fate is not sealed until Hoshana Rabbah on the 7th day. So we can still continue with our penitential prayers through then. That entire season is unified because each day we read or chant Psalm 27. Okay? Now, there's also musical midrash and text painting that makes connections. So, excuse me. We said that at the end of Ne'ilah, we put the nail in the sukkah that connects high holidays to Sukkot. We also connect musically. The Misinai tune, the Ne'ilah Chatzi Kaddish, Yitkadash, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, and Sukkot morning, Ha'el HaKadosh. So the outline for Ne'ilah Kaddish, Yiraram Sukkot, Yiraram, mirror images of each other. So musically, we connect those two things. Yes, Yiraram is a phrase that you will hear during Yom Kippur, but that's a different issue. which we don't have time to talk about today. Now, I have to say this is my favorite one. Rosh Hashanah morning, sound the blessing for the sounding of the shofar before the shofar service. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar. Now the blessing before we read the Megillah on Purim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah. Why are those almost the same? Well, there's a problem with the book of Esther. The book of Esther is problematic because it is the only book in the entire Tanakh that leaves out one kind of important character, and that is God. Well, one of the themes of Rosh Hashanah is the kingship of God. And indeed, during this shofar service, we have an entire section called Malchuyot about the kingship of God. So, by using that same melody to introduce the Megillah, we bring God, the King of Kings, into the reading of the Megillah, into the story of Esther. Okay, there is, and this is a parallel. There's a parallel to this in the scroll itself. So, you'll notice this is from Megillat Esther. You'll notice that the two columns both start with the word Hamelech. So there is a tradition that the Sofer, after the first column, will work it out so that every column starts with the word Hamelech. And I think it goes through about the 4th chapter, if I'm recalling correctly. Now, Hamelech, of course, refers to Hamelech Achashverosh, but by putting Hamelech at the beginning of each column, you imply Hamelech HaMelachim, the King of Kings, is part of the story. Okay? And another one that I'm also very fond of. So, Sheva Brachot for the wedding service. This is a setting by Morris Barish, which I like a lot because of some of the things that he brings in. This is the 3rd blessing, and I need to take a swig of tea before I attempt this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Yotzer Hadam. He inserts a little fragment from Akhdamut. So Akhdamut is the 90-verse Aramaic poem that is chanted with this melody on Shavuot. You're very familiar with the melody from the Kiddush for the festivals. V'titen lanu Adonai Eloheinu b'ahava, moedim l'simcha, chagim uzmanim l'sason. Here, he puts a phrase of that, Eloheinu melech haolam, into the blessing. Why would you include a phrase of Akhdamut into the wedding service? Well, Akhdamut is associated with Shavuot. Shavuot, we mark the giving of Torah at Sinai. The ultimate covenant is the covenant between God and the children of Israel through Torah. So by putting it in the wedding service, you were elevating the covenant being made by the two spouses. All right? A couple of text painting pieces. Gevrot ha'el hagadol hagibor behanora el elyon, God on high. And the only reason I mention this is that in some versions I hear el elyon, which leaves it out. The second one was also from the Giverot. This is the congregational part. If you do the Wolberg Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Wolberg wrote, Kayem emunato lishenei afar michamocha, etc., etc. Some congregations do it a little differently. Kayem emunato lishenei afar. God raises up his faithful who sleep in the dust. Lishenei afar, raising them up out of the dust. Some people think it's too cute. I think it's effective text painting. So take your choice. This is one of the verses of Tal that was notated by Noah Shaw. And I did a program with Tal, and Noah Shaw was actually my coach. And even though he notated it, he told me that I should make a substitution. So the part that's outlined in yellow here. So what he did was he took that melody, which is the signature melody that comes out of a lot of these Misinai tunes. The Chatzi Kaddish before Tal and Geshem is a Misinai tune. So, we've seen that a couple of times already. That's how he noted it. He suggested that I drop that and take the same line out of the Setting by Israel Alter, who does Ir Kasuka Noteret, the city like an abandoned or deserted sukkah. This refers to the desolate or the destroyed Jerusalem. Destroyed Jerusalem, we observe that on Tisha B'Av, where we'd use trope, yitiv munachaton, ir kasukanoteret. So you make a stronger text painting, or it's sort of halfway between Midrash and text painting, I think. One final one. Atagibor leolam Adonai, mechai metim atarav lehoshia, mashiv haruach umorid hagashem. Where's the tune Mashiv haruach umorid hagashem come from? Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. It comes from Song of the Sea, the festive melody of the Torah, which we use principally in the Song of the Sea. And the tradition is that the narrative part, the story, is chanted in regular trope, but the verses that celebrate God's power, God's might, are chanted with the festive melody. Ahashir al Adonai ki gaoga sus verochevo ramav hayam. So, Mashiv haruach umorid hagashem. This is the Giverot about God's power, and so we use the phrase that's used for God's power in the Torah, and we bring it in here. There's also another subtle connection here, which I'm going to try to explain. Mechaye Meitim, God who gives life to the dead or who revives the dead. Our tradition says that one of the elements that revives the dead is water. If you live in the desert, water equals life. Where Mashiv HaRuach is here is the place where you would bench Tal or Geshem on the first day of Passover or the last day of Sukkot. Okay, so and there's a beautiful line in Hosea. It's one of my favorites of the Tanakh. God says, "I will be like the dew to Israel; he will blossom like the lily." Dew is what revives, is what revives the people Israel. Okay, so it makes that connection as well with water equaling life. God's power is to give the dew, which will restore life, and therefore, Mashiva Ruach Umarid HaKashem, if you like a firmer ending. All right. So, I'm going to share two pieces with you that will just talk a little bit about how I conceive of using some of this material when I am planning a service. Okay? So, my congregation in Charlotte like to do the Debbie Friedman Ahavat Olam on Friday night. Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amecha Ahavta Amecha Ahavta. Now, I spent a huge amount of effort. One of the things that was so important to me in planning worship was to have a worship that flowed continuously and returned the responsibility for prayer back to the congregants. One of the things that happens in our Reform worship is that the congregants do not do anything unless the rabbi tells them to. Please stand. Chant Baruch Hu. Please be seated. We continue in the middle of page whatever. Every time the leader gives an instruction, you have to pay attention to the instruction. You're not paying attention to your prayer. Traditional Jewish prayer is that we pray as individuals in the midst of the congregation. In other words, we all have responsibility to our own prayer. And I want the people to be able to pray in whatever way is important to them. So on a Friday night, if they want to sing along with the congregation, that's great. If they want to immerse themselves in the prayers and meditate on those on their own, I want to let them. I want to have the atmosphere where they can do that. So having something, and I could do an entire presentation just on all the various elements of that. If you're interested, we can talk about that some other time. Our congregation, so we would do Baruch Hu, and we would do an English reading of Ma'ariv Aravim. Usually I would play underneath it, very quietly. And in the innovation for Mishkan Tefillah was that at the end of every prayer, Hebrew translation, creative renderings of the prayer would be the final blessing. Okay? And the idea was that whatever you read, you would do Baruch Atah Adonai Hama'ariv Aravim, and you turn the page. Okay. So I'm playing lightly under it, and I am now going to use the melody of Ahavat Olam for the blessing of Ma'ariv Aravim to lead into it very smoothly. It's like playing an intro, essentially. Baruch atah Adonai Hama'ariv Aravim Ahavat Olam. So nice and smooth. I don't have to give instructions. They know what's coming. They know what to do. Now, I also like to incorporate some of the traditional phrases. And we said earlier that da-dee-da-da-dee-da-da-da-dum, that little quirky phrase that comes in the first two blessings in the in Ma'ariv, Shabbat Ma'ariv. I'm going to introduce that. So, Debbie wrote the piece all the way to the very end of the blessing. I cut it off a little bit earlier, and I insert the traditional piece. Uvahem negeyomam valayla b'yomam valayla v'havatecha Al tasir mimenu leolamim, Baruch ata Adonai, Ohev amo Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, excuse me, etc. Oh, excuse me. I said that quirky little phrase actually can serve us in other ways. So it is possible, instead of going down to that low note and starting there, I can start that phrase on the same note that I ended the song on. Excuse me. Yomam v'layla ve'avatecha al tasir mimenu leolamim Baruch atah Adonai Ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu. So I use it in two different ways. I can be in a low key or I can be in a higher key. And as I said, that phrase allows us to be in major or in minor. So the first time, the way I have it written on the screen is major, but I just rendered it in in minor. All right, one final one. Gosh, and I think I have a minute and a half. All right. I studied choral conducting at the University of Washington with Abraham Kaplan. Abraham Kaplan was an Israeli conductor, moved to New York, taught at Juilliard, and prepared choruses for Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic. The man was a musical genius. But one of the things that I loved the most was that when he did an oratorio, he had the whole picture in mind at once. So it wasn't little pieces, but he knew at the beginning, and so I learned when I dropped that downbeat of the Haydn creation, I know how it's going to end, 2 hours later. Yom Kippur is a long day. I'm telling you nothing that you don't know. When I stand in the back of the congregation on Kol Nidre with the congregants lined up behind me with holding Torah scrolls, and I chant, Or zaru ala tzadik, le'ishrelei v'simcha. I'm hearing in my head the final shofar blast the next afternoon. Kol Nidre itself is probably, other than the Yizkor service during Yom Kippur, which is a different issue, is probably the most emotionally powerful piece. And we do it in the evening, and then we come back the next day and we just move on with all the other prayers, and we're hungry and all of that. It is traditional that the first thing that the main cantor chants in the morning is Hamelech. And in order to pick up on that emotion of Kol Nidre, I use this version, which I adapted from the Bear Anthology. Ah, 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 Hayoshev Kisei Ram Venisam. So I start the morning again with the power of Kol Nidre. Just one word in conclusion. I called the textbook and the presentation The Sound of Sacred Time. Beginning of the Torah, God creates the heavens and the earth. God creates light, the seas and the dry land, the sun and the moon and the stars, the plants, the animals, and calls all of them good. Then God creates human beings and calls them very good. A judgment which I question some days, but that's a different issue. When God creates Shabbat, a unit of time, that is the first thing in the Torah that is called holy. Time is the first thing that is called holy. And this Nusach tradition, writ large, is really how we delineate all of that sacred time. So, I hope that was somewhat helpful, somewhat useful.
So
Okay.
we want to thank you, Andrew, for this amazing, amazing teaching. We want to thank you for your generosity to share what you have with everybody. That's not in every cantor's mind, and that's why it's a big, big, big honor, a great honor for us to have you. And yeah, we hope to get more of your wisdom in the nearer future. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Liz, for taking all of us together and sending it out to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye-bye.